Our next speaker has already been briefly introduced. Professor Javaid Rehman is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran and Professor of Law at Brunel University in London. He was formerly a Professor of Law at the Transitional Justice Institute at Ulster University 2002 to 2005 and Lecturer and Senior Lecturer at the Law School, University of Leeds 1996 to 2002. Between 2019 and 2021, he acted as a member of the Coordination Committee of the Special Procedures United Nations Human Rights Office. It's our pleasure to welcome Professor Rahman. He came in from the UK. The floor is yours, Professor.
Thank you. Good afternoon, colleagues, friends. It's a great pleasure and great honor to be here this afternoon. I'm going to be speaking about a tragic incident. I have learned much from it already, but I endeavor to learn a lot more from you. And I hope that we will have a good interactive discussion subsequent to my presentation. I begin by thanking the Rastyad Research Collective research project on the 1981 massacres in Iran. I would like to thank Professor Angor for his kind moderation and for the kind invitation. I want to thank Shaheen Nasiri for his generous invitation and also to Dr. Laila Azhar. They have invited me generously to participate in this afternoon's event that has been organized by the Netherlands Institute for War, Holocaust and Genocide Studies and the University of Amsterdam. So I thank all the sponsors for my visit. Colleagues, this afternoon I'm going to speak to you in my capacity as the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran. I'm fully aware of the focus of this afternoon's discussion, that this afternoon's discussion is dedicated on the 1981 massacres on Iran. However, as the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation, the current contemporary situation in Iran, I hope you would allow me to make, at least initially, a few references to the current situation. And in so doing, I would like also to highlight the relationship and the connection to what's happening today and what happened in 1981, because there is a very obvious and yet often unclear, unrecognized relationship between the atrocities that took place in 1981 and to what happened and what is happening today. As a special procedures mandate holder on Iran since 2018, I have consistently and tragically been confronted by serious and gross violations of human rights being conducted by the Iranian regime against the Iranian people, including executions by state authorities, most recently by the authorities during the 2019 protest, November 2019 protest, and of course the protest that started from the killing of Jina Mahsa Amini while she was in the custody of the morality police. As you would know, Ms. Amini died on 16th of September last year, 3 days after her arrest for allegedly failing to comply with the country's strict rules on women's dress by wearing what they call it as an improper hijab. And therein there is this connection and a relationship of how the hijab rules originated. And I think Shaheen has already mentioned to the starting point of the enforcement of the hijab laws in the early 1980s. Since the protests of September 2022, since they started in September 22, you would know that at least 537 persons, including 74 children, and at least 34 women have been killed. At least 7 protesters have been executed on charges which include the charge of Muharabe, which is the enmity against God. And herein again, there is a relevance to what we're going to talk about, the relationship of these executions to the starting point from 1981. Death penalty as an institution and as an instrument to instill fear was evident through the executions of well over 500 persons, of which less than 60 were made public. So last year, when the protest started, over 500 persons were executed, At least 3 persons sentenced to death as children were executed in 2022. So there is this relationship of executions taking place. And I should say these executions of 500 persons were executed in the entirety of 2022. So these executions, the way the state instill fears, is connected to the 1981 massacres, because that was the idea, to terrify the people themselves. And again, as Shaheen has mentioned, the executions of minors goes back to what was happening in 1981, because the state is still pursuing those ideological positions. They interpret executions of minors as a practice that is allowed within the Islamic system, which to my mind is completely unacceptable. But nevertheless, what I want to say is that the execution of children that is currently taking place can be related to the 1981 events. Although the current atrocities have taken place over 40 years since the 1981 massacres, there are clear historical connections which I'm trying to establish through my presentation to you. But let me first, if you would allow me, to make a few initial comments on the current project, that is the 1981 project under consideration at this time. And here, I would like to take an opportunity to congratulate the researchers involved in this project, and I am looking at 2 here, Shaheen and Lela, because there are very significant outcomes. And I would also like to take this opportunity to commend the project and the coordinators of this project, the Rastyad Research Collective research project, because I see significant value to my work, and I'm sure to the value of the United Nations and many other institutions. The findings are really very significant. And amongst the most significant findings and attributes I find as a current special rapporteur and for my mandate, it is that it connects the various missing links or gaps that I've always wondered, what are they? What has this institution or what has this phenomenon come from? And now I can actually see the linkage, because it is all interconnected, you see. The 1979 revolution, the 1981 massacres, the 1988 massacres, and what is happening today. They are not isolated. And that is, I think, to the great credit of the researchers, and I applaud them and I appreciate that work. As this project establishes, the 1981 massacre took place following a fatwa by the then Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, resulting in the execution of thousands of political opponents, including communists, socialists, social democrats, liberals, as well as moderate Islamists. Amongst the most important and what I say interconnecting features, I would like to highlight the following. Firstly, based on the most important facts presented by this project, I am in full agreement, and I'm in agreement with the project coordinators and researchers, that the 1981 massacre should be considered as the most extensive atrocity committed by the Iranian government. Secondly, I'm also in agreement that although the 1981 massacre represented the first nationwide mass execution of political dissidents after the revolution, this mass atrocity has received insufficient legal attention, both nationally and internationally. This is obviously in comparison to the enforced disappearances, the arbitrary and mass executions of 1988, which have received considerable more international attention, including attention by the United Nations Special Procedures, including by my own mandate. And I was very interested to read your references to our communication to the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran a couple of years back, where we raised the concern about the 1988 mass executions, which we described as crimes against humanity. So we have considered the 1988 massacres, but but not so much, or not so far, or not up until now, the 1981 massacres. And that has been, in my understanding, insufficient. Our attention has been insufficient, and we must work on that. The 1988 massacres were also under the spotlight recently in the Swedish domestic courts during the trial and conviction of Mr. Hamid Nouri. You would know about that conviction that took place last year, I believe, and it is still on appeal. No such similar attention has been placed on the 1981 massacres. The researchers in this project have advanced very strong and plausible reasons for the negligible attention that was paid to the 1981 massacres, including the determination of the Iranian government to hide these massacres through false narratives and statements, distortion of historical data, active harassment of survivors and family members of the victims, as well as by hiding the evidence such as the destruction of mass graves. Obviously, the timing of the 1981 massacre was very sensitive, but it was also critical. An important factor in these massacres being relatively unknown to the outside world was that these massacres took place at the beginning of the Iran-Iraq war that started in 1980 and lasted up until 1989, allowing the Iranian government a unique opportunity to get rid of its opponents and also to hide these mass atrocities. The third point that I want to make is that, as in the contemporary situation in Iran, authorities have denied families the right to truth about their loved ones. Over 40 years ago, thousands were massacred and their remains were hidden, and yet the authorities are hiding the facts, and they're trying to hoodwink the world and trying to deceive people into making them believe that nothing of any significance ever took place. Yeah? The fourth point that I have is that we see a prevalent pattern that the authorities use by accusing those who have leaked records relating to preparation, planning, and coordination, implementation of mass killings, of disclosing state secrets, and threatening national security. And here I see the relevance of what's happening today to what happened over 40 years ago. Today, you know that the two journalists who initially informed the world about the killing of Gina Mahsa Amini are being tried for potentially, they're being tried, which could mean death sentence, you see. So that is the same pattern, and that is the same behavior which was followed immediately after the Iranian Revolution, and we see that in the 1981 massacres, how they have targeted those who tried to inform the world about these massacres. Fifthly, there is this issue of impunity. There is impunity and absence of accountability. Impunity continues to prevail within Iran, both in cases of the current ongoing serious human rights violations, as well as the massacres that took place in 1981 and 1988. So the people, and I think in the previous presentation, Shaheen referred to the current supreme leader, who has a significant role to play in the 1981 massacres. He still has a role to play in what is going on. Similarly, the current president, Ibrahim Raisi, has a lot to answer for what happened in 1981 and 1988, and today he's still in power. So there is this accountability deficit or absence of accountability in Iran. The absence of accountability is as much prevalent in the Iranian legal and judicial system today as it was in 1981. Those who were involved in the 1981 massacres currently hold or have held positions of power and authority in the country. So now let me come back to some of the original features. I have highlighted a comparative analysis, and I hope I have tried to convince you that there is a strong relationship between 1981 to what we are seeing today. And having said that, I would like you to see the uniqueness of this project as well, what it has brought to the table. So while I have highlighted some of the comparisons between the current situation to what happened in the case of 1981 massacres, as the initial exercise of mass execution in Iran, the 1981 massacres established certain doctrines and certain institutions which have subsequently provided a legal cover for subsequent violations in the country. So you see, while there is a linkage, we have to see what was the starting point of the concepts and the institutions that were developed to brutalize and to degrade and to humiliate masses of Iranian people. And that is where we will find our knowledge expanded when we look at the 1981 massacres and massacres that took place at that time. So we won't have so much time to go into depth on that, but I will just highlight at least three to you, just make references to those, and hopefully we'll have time during our dialogue later on. So while all the summary executions took place in a legal vacuum in 1981, and they had no established legal grounding at that time, subsequently a legal cover was established, it was developed through some institutions and through some phenomena. And this is quite regardless of whether they are ever recognized in international law. All of these, which I will mention, are complete and blatant violation of international human rights law, as well as Iran's own commitments to international law. And these are as follows. So the first one I want to point out is the establishment of the revolutionary courts. So you would have come across, and I think Shaheen also referred to, and I saw in your project, various references to these revolutionary courts. Now, what are these courts? These courts were originally designed to be ad hoc courts, or those institutions which were of a temporary usage and designed by Imam Khomeini for his own particular ends. While these courts still had a semi-official character in 1981, after their extensive usage and mass executions of political opponents at that time, these courts acquired a permanent judicial body designed as a state instrument to execute Iranians in very large numbers. The revolutionary courts, as I have noted in many of my reports, have continually failed to respect the right to fair trial and due process and rely heavily on confessions obtained through torture or ill treatment. This is all in violation of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and of international law. The international covenants, as you know, have been ratified by Iran, but they continually abuse them. Yeah. So on the revolutionary courts, they have condemned to death thousands of people over the last 40 years, but their record is no less painful now as it was at that time. If you look at the history of how these courts operate, abuse of power, absence of due process, complete violations of human rights, no legal counsel, no respect for the defendant, no rights, reliance heavily on confessions obtained through torture, and completely reckless as to whether they respect any norm of international human rights law. The second point that I want to make is about the execution of children. Now, again, this point was highlighted in the earlier presentation. The 1981 massacres tragically set the stage for the execution of children. Now, I would want to learn more about what happened post-1979, immediately after 1979. I suspect that many children were executed in the revolution, but the 1981 massacres set the stage for developing a completely unacceptable norm that children could be executed. Now, if you look at the Iranian Penal Code, children as young as, girls as young as 9 and boys as young as 15 can be executed for certain offenses, for qisas and for hudud offenses. That is written in the penal code. And you can lay the link of the 1981 massacres to the 1982 penal code, and thereon words to the 2013 penal code, to which I'm citing these references. So, the 1981 massacres also tragically set the stage for the execution of children. This prohibition, as you know, is established in international law that child offenders could never be executed. It's written in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 6, and also the Child Rights Convention, both of which have been accepted by Iran. Yet the Iranians continue to execute children. And I see that every year, and I mentioned to you just now, 3 children were executed last year. So there is this unfortunate, tragic reflection of what happened in 1981 to what's happening today. And thirdly and finally, I just want to say that the 1981 massacres also set the stage of certain offenses that were established at that time. So I think our moderator has also mentioned, but Shaheen has also mentioned, offenses such as marhabe, enmity against God, nafsad fil ard, corruption on earth. Initiating these as part of Iran's criminal law, these offenses have tragically now become firmly established within Iran's penal code, and they are deployed heavily for executing individuals and instilling fear amongst Iran's people. So if you look at what happened to the protesters, they have been charged with muharebe and have been executed. So these offenses have their roots, which go back to at least 1981 and to Imam Khomeini. So I think it is very important that we relate the tragedy of Iran today to what has been happening over the past 40 years. I end by thanking all of the researchers, the project coordinators, the chair for today, you all for coming and listening to me. And I very much hope that we would continue our dialogue. And importantly, we will have justice done for all of the victims who have never seen any justice. And we want to make sure that accountability does take place, and the UN does its very best to ensure accountability and justice for all of these thousands of individuals, and importantly, their families and their loved ones. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Rehman.